Okay, my name is Aylul Fajrinniar Ainiyah. My student number is A320200049. Okay, I will to continue the presentation. Setting indoctrination. If it is said that education ought to involve only morally acceptable ways of teaching, then most people will conclude that indoctrination is not admissible. As we have seen, the term is used in numerous different ways, and so far we have not identified a clear definition. This is not a merely academic matter. Teachers and parents need to understand which approaches are morally admissible and which are not. In other words, they need to identify some sort of criteria for demarcating indoctrination from education. As we have already seen, at a very general level, indoctrination involves leading people to hold certain beliefs in certain ways. However, it does not follow that we necessarily ought to denounce all teaching of belief. Philosophers would say that imparting belief is a necessary condition of indoctrination, but not a sufficient condition. Some other conditions or conditions are needed to say that indoctrination has taken place. Not surprisingly, philosophers have offered a range of interpretations of the conditions sufficient for indoctrinations. The first, we will consider focus on the content of what is taught. Most writers assume that indoctrination is related to a specific type of belief, namely doctrines. For example, R.S. Peters 1966 p. 41 states that whatever else indoctrination means, it obviously has something to do with doctrines. Even those philosophers who reject the claim that content is the sufficient condition for indoctrination still maintain that the teaching of doctrines often involve indoctrinations. Nevertheless, the distinction is not strong or easy to articulate, which makes it difficult to accept as a convincing criterion for demarcating indoctrinations. Discussion of the content of indoctrination invariably raise questions about the methods used to teach. As we have seen, authoritarian methods have often been used to foster authoritarian belief. Clearly, some methods of inculcating belief are indefensible, such as brainwashing, drugging, sleep deprivation, and subliminal message. Taylor, 2004. But very few teachers would contemplate their use. So it may be the case that focusing on methods as the condition of indoctrination can lull us into a false sense of security as we end up overlooking other, more subtle approach. The third contender for the sufficient condition of indoctrination is the intention of the teacher. Terence M. C. Laughlin, 1984 p. 78, followed this line of argument when he defined indoctrination as the intentional inculcation of unshakable belief, and writes that indoctrination constitutes an attempt to restrict in a substantial way the child's eventual ability to function autonomously. In this regard, there is an important distinction to be drawn between the teacher's avowed intentions, what they say they are trying to do, and the real intention, what they are in fact trying to do. Burrow and Woods, 2006. A tight association between indoctrination and intention would therefore seem to exclude precisely the types of teaching that the concept of indoctrination was designed to address. As Harvey Siegel, 1988 p. 81 makes clear, while content, methods, and intentions are neither necessary nor sufficient for indoctrination. They all tend to promote non-evidential belief. This is the heart of the problem with indoctrination. It fosters a non-evidential or non-critical style of belief that makes open-mindedness and autonomy unattainable. The apparent inevitability of indoctrinations. Philosophers of education have almost universally portrayed indoctrination as a non-educational practice, in that they have gone to some lengths to differentiate education from indoctrinations. It is surprising then that many of them also believe that it is inevitable. James Garrison, 1986 p. 272, describes indoctrination as inevitable and desirable, and even goes as far as to claim that the failure to indoctrinate would perhaps be analogous to murder or, at the very least, abortions. In accepting indoctrination as inescapable, this writer seems to assume a position akin to that of Wagner, cited in 2004, which is that indoctrination involves causing a person to hold a belief that they are unable to justify on rational grounds. This is most telling in the case of very young children, since it is often assumed that they are not capable of deliberately choosing to follow the rational course of action or capable of being persuaded rationally. According to the other proposed criteria of indoctrination: content, intention, and consequence, it is entirely reasonable to suggest that young children are temporarily unable to comprehend a set of belief and practice, but that the content or intention or consequence are fully compatible with educational principles like autonomy. Accepting that many beliefs are acquired before a student is capable of rationally comprehending them, it is useful to distinguish between two distinct contexts: those in which the lack of reasons or evidence are temporary, and those in which they are permanent state of affairs. Siegel, 1988. The central issue is not whether or not the students are given reasons or evidence in favor of a belief, but whether or not such reasons or evidence exists.